Most leaders assume there's the one steering the ship. Why do you believe they're dead wrong?
Employees are truly the users of the organization. When we go to work, we don't just want to be employees. We want to be able to participate. I need to go find somebody that's going to help me communicate with my organization. It's this way to making a disgruntled employee is to just continue to throw money at them. The entrepreneur doesn't understand what he's doing. Why does my employee not do this when I need him to do that? Because you're disconnected.
What if everything you've been told about leading people is wrong? Dr. Luarca says your employees aren't the problem, your processes are. So buckle up today, guys, for a mind-bending dive into the psychology of leadership. And I believe it's going to make us rethink everything about leadership. Dr. Luarca, I want to make sure I pronounce your Spanish name right. Thank you for being on the episode today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
I want to get into your book, and we'll make sure that we have that in the show notes below on Amazon. But you say in your book that leaders aren't the real users of their organization's process. Employees are. And that most leaders assume there's the one steering the ship. Why do you believe they're dead wrong?
Well, it's interesting. Not only do I believe it, but I've actually seen it. In my 25 years of doing this, in the first meeting with the client, it's usually the owner, I always ask them to take me through the shop, if you will, take me through the company. What do you guys do over here? What do you guys do over there? And inevitably, it's the same answer. 80 plus different companies that I've worked with so far, it's the same answer. Well, I don't know. Let Jim, why don't you come over here? And Louis wants to know what we do here, right? So it's not just that, but when you get into the subtleties of the accounting cycle, the accounting process, the operational process, most leadership is not aware. They're just not. On the sales side, all leadership is hyper aware of sales. How to sell this, how to sell that, what's going on, what are the commissions, what are the margins? When I look at most organizations, I talk to the organization, the leadership, and the employees. It really boils down to the employees are not only pushing those buttons, but they're getting the product out. They're engineering, they're designing, they are fabricating. They're doing everything. Most leaders are not. Leaders are doing what they're supposed to be doing, leading the vision, leading the organization. That's why I say that employees are truly the users of the organization, right? Which is, it goes into my 25 years of doing this, where if the employees are the users of the organization, let's get them to design the organization, its processes, its policy. And you don't leave the leadership out of that. Everybody does that collectively, co-create, right? So I've seen that many times. I've helped a lot of companies do that, get away from that thinking that I'm the boss. I started this 30 years ago and I'm still going to be the boss. Okay, but there's different types of leadership. And the one leadership type should be pay attention to your employees. They're the ones who are doing what it is you need them to do.
Would you advocate for like a decentralized leadership? Is there a label you can put on this or not really?
No, you can't. I mean, when you really think about the function of leadership, it really is that 60,000 foot level. Somebody needs to be there. The employees are at the 5,000 foot level. Some of them at the 15,000 foot level. Some of them at the 30,000 foot level. But you do need that 1, 2, 3 people at that leadership. I don't think decentralizing or giving it a name is functional. When you look at what's going on in the macroeconomic environment today, it's great to get ideas and suggestions from your employees, but also at the end of the day, somebody's got to make the decision. What are we going to do? But if that leader is surrounded by great minds, which all organizations have great minds. I mean, that's why you hired them, right? That's why you hired those employees. In Jack Welch's first book, he confessed that his success at GE at the time had nothing to do with him. Had everything to do with all the people he surrounded himself. They're the ones who created that model that generated all that wealth at GE. And Jack Welch was never ashamed to say, hey, I didn't do this. My employees did it, right? So I think decentralizing leadership, not only would that be a major paradigm shift that would just simply not be accepted, but it just wouldn't work. It has to be somebody steering the ship. right?
Yeah, I want to get into like the uncomfortable shift in mindset that people have to make today when they're leading people. But I know you're an expert at manufacturing. You've worked with, tons of companies in that arena. And now we have, I think this is really relevant because whether you like it or hate it, what's happening here in the United States with politics, there's a big push to bring manufacturing back into the United States. What's the mind shift? What's that uncomfortable shift if we've got as leaders, if we've got to get this, okay, we're going to start building plants. We're going to have manufacturing here. What's this leading through? Like, how do we start leading through our people?
I think the best way to lead through our people, our employees, is to listen to them, let them participate in the development of the organization, particularly in these days. These have to be the most difficult days for any business, whether you're the bakery down the street to the manufacturer in Dallas has to think about the workforce. And here's where a little bit of that psychology comes in. So at the end of the day, employees are humans, right? And as humans, we need to take care of ourselves, food, water, shelter. When we go to work, we don't just want to be employees. We want to be able to participate and develop the security of our being able to provide food, water, shelter for our family. Some allowing feedback, suggestions, ideas in these times for leadership, I would guess, is very, very important. As these times are difficult, they're not as difficult as COVID times. During COVID, a phenomenal number of small businesses went out of business because they just couldn't handle the slowdown, no revenue. I think there's a statistic out there that says that about 27% of small businesses just shuttered because they didn't have enough cash flow for 2 weeks of payroll. Average American small business does not have cash for 2 weeks of payroll. So again, employees have those ideas, have those suggestions. So I think for leadership in these days, and any day really, you should query your employees. I have to confess, in my 25 years of doing this, my success is based on me talking to the employees. I hear it all the time. At the end of my time with most companies, the owner inevitably says to me, Louis, how did you do that? How did you do that thing? Well, Jim told me that he's been trying to talk to you for the last 5 years. That's how I did it, right? I talked to Jim. I presented it to you. You know that this is what your employees are saying. Let's do this because I am who I am. Plugged it in and it worked. A lot of my success is due to listening to the employees. So in these difficult times, uncharted water, as they say on CNBC, we should be listening to everybody. Yeah, employees are probably the best consultant you can ever have.
And can you let us in on a little secret about, okay, so you go talk to Jim, right? And Jim, you've kind of, I mean, you're smart enough and have done this, with this psychology first approach to know that Jim is the linchpin. So you go talk to Jim, like you said, Jim's been trying to do this for 5+ years. No one's really listening to him, maybe because he's got a gruff personality, whatever it may be. How do you get the gold out of Jim so that you can, and then, not only how do you get the gold out, but then how do you filter out to be like, shit, this is the thing that we need, for us to do X, Y, and Z?
It's pretty simple, actually. A lot of companies try to do this, right? A lot of companies have the suggestion box, right?
Surveys, yeah, all that.
Right. Surveys, suggestion box, and employees will put in their suggestions, and those suggestions fall on deaf ears. Yeah, those suggestions are read, but there's no communication back to Jim. Jim, it's a great idea, but now's not the time. Jim, it's a great idea, but it's not a fit for now, right? Or maybe, Jim, this is a great idea. Help me plug this in, right? So you kill like 3 or 4 birds with that stone, right? Jim gets to see, and here's where the psychology plays. And there's a lot of psychologists out there who research the fact that humans love attention. We need to be acknowledged. Look at me. So if I say to Jim, this is a great idea, Jim, help me plug it in. Huge. Jim sees it. The other employees see that Jim's suggestion was a home run. I'm going to start suggesting. I'm also responding to the suggestion box. Maybe I say to Jim, hey, Jim, this is a great idea, but it's not a good fit right now. Jim is still proud that he got a message back, right?
Yes.
Again, the psychology is that we want to be seen and heard. We don't want to be an employee number. We want to be a contributor, a participant. I don't just push buttons here, right? I don't just design things for us to ship out the door. I have a brain, right? I'm smart, not like people say I'm not. It's a line from The Godfather, right? I think it's important for leadership to understand that little bit of psychology, it's innate in all of us. We want to be heard. And even if it's a crazy idea, hey, boss, I think we should start building rocket ships and painting them blue. Okay, I get it. Thank you for your suggestion. Here's why that's not a good idea, right? So, um, I'll always say it. I'm never afraid to say it, even in my position. Your best ideas come from your employees. They just do.
Yeah, and that's amazing that we get so busy, so caught up in, KPIs and all these other things, and we're kind of sitting in these conference rooms going through, where our ideas are coming from, the C-suite. When in actuality, like you said, there's a cave full of treasures that we won't go mine.
Yep. About 12 years ago, I was a minority shareholder in a sheet metal company in Houston, and we did some phenomenal things. It wasn't just me. If anything, we promoted 5 guys from the shop. 2 of them were welders, right? They're out in the shop, Houston humidity, sweating. We gave them the opportunity to go learn AutoCAD and SolidWorks, and they did that. We moved them upstairs into the air-conditioned office. Not only was that a quality advancement for us, because I just brought 2 welders up from the shop who understand how to design now. There's metallurgy that's involved there. But all the other employees got to see that those 2 guys got a major. Our quality went up, our efficiency went up, our lead time went down. We went from 45 days of lead time to 5 days. I'm not saying it was those 2 guys, but it was everybody in the company seeing that, hey, there's an opportunity here. Lewis is listening to us, and that just makes everybody's day. I mean, it made the organization, to this day, that organization is ticking like a clock. So it does fall on leadership to recognize the little psychology involved. There's a popular psychologist out there, Abraham Maslow. He always talks about self-actualization. I incorporated that into my PhD dissertation and a lot of my research, but I've also come up with my own theory. I call it the kitty cat theory. Psychologists don't like this. When I talk to other psychologists, they're like, what? That's not. But think about this. Whenever you pet a kitty cat, a cat, right? They love that. Cats love that. You pet them enough. When you walk in the door, they're with you, right? You feed them, etc. But when you pet them, they're so aware of you, right?
Mhm.
I've learned to do that with some employees where I'm just listening to what they want. And all they want is to be heard, acknowledged. And in my mind, I'm gonna help them along by responding. At a minimum, all you got to do is respond. Just pet the cat. Again, going back to the gym example. So, Jim, that's not a great idea. Maybe next year, maybe never. But Jim was just looking for some acknowledgement. So that's all the minimum that leadership could do is that. It's a huge win in that relationship between us and them. I think that's vitally important to any organ. I don't care if you're Apple. I don't care if you're the little guy down the street building brooms. It's super important. Really, really is important.
I love that. And on your website, Luarca.com, there's a lot of stuff on there, and I encourage everybody to go on there, hop on there. But you argue inefficient processes don't just cost money, they cost customers and employees. But when you say inefficient processes, can you kind of open up when you walk into a business or you consult, what are you seeing, whether it's manufacturing or whatever it may be, what are you seeing when you say inefficient processes?
So that's twofold. I'll just back up a couple of years. So I have an accounting background. I started doing what I do because I'm an accountant. And after I figured out, hey, I'm pretty good at this, I started to look beyond the accounting department, beyond the general ledger, profit and loss. And I just started to realize that there are other things that influence the accounting cycle or the accounting of a business. And that is how efficient the business can be. And the efficiency in that business is related to one of 2 things. A machine or a human. 80% of manufacturing or business is driven by a human, whether that human is pushing a button or not. It's a human. So when I started to talk to employees, I started to hear that they're just not happy. Why not? A, machine doesn't work. B, I do all this work when it's easier if I did it this way. C, I don't know why we're doing that way because we've always done it that way. So when I say that there are processes that are inefficient, it's because of that. We've always done it this way. And then so you start hiring employees under that same mentality. Now you're just exacerbating those inefficient processes. Goes back to originally what I said. Let the employees who are the users of all those processes tell you, leadership, how to make that thing more efficient. And again, 25 years of doing this, 80 different companies, 120 different leaderships, 14,000 employees. You kind of learn a few things. I remember once I was with a company and I walked in conference room and the operations manager is there with the HR manager and one of the engineers. And I said, "Hey, what are you guys doing in here? I got a meeting in here. We're talking about how to make the welding department more efficient." And I said, "How come the 14 welders aren't in this room? Why are you guys making that decision?" Sure enough, that mentality changed. Within 6 months, those 14 welders increased the capacity of the business because we finally said to the entire company, "All right, you guys, you 14 guys, you have all these great ideas. Plug them in. Let's see which one works. Let's see which one doesn't." That's how we were able to get that company from 45-day lead time to 5 days because the welders had these phenomenal ideas that we just plugged in. So it really boils down to allowing those employees to edit, tweak, pivot those processes. Most organizations believe, well, we've always done it this way. Okay, but that's why you are where you are as an organization. Make a little pivot. How do you make that pivot? Ask your employees, or you can hire me. You're going to pay for it, but I will do the same thing I just told you to do. Talk to your employees. Hey, it's worked out for a lot of companies. I've been very successful at this, and it's really been a great 25 years. It really has.
I love that. And, one of the things that you mentioned is it's not just money. It's and this is a big one. People don't realize this. It's not just money. It's not just customers, but these employees that want to have buy-in. They want, they're there for 8 hours a day or whatever it may be, 10, 12 hours a day. They want to have like a purpose, a meaning. And if they're bought into the organization, they want to be heard. So, you're going to lose good employees. Do you have like a story on that or something that you've seen a leader's blind spot, like kind of just bleed the organization dry with, because they've done this?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of that. You believe it or not, in my 25 years, I've terminated 15 different companies. My reputation's on the line, and these leaders just can't get out of their own way. Uh, there's a popular podcast out there. I can't remember the host, but there's a podcast about Jeff Bezos. Why did he leave Amazon? Halfway through the podcast, the host says, "Hey, Jeff, why did you leave Amazon?" And Jeff says, "Well, I realized that not only was I the CEO of Amazon, but I was the CEO of getting in my own way. So I had to leave."
That's
I
awesome.
can't, I, in 2023, I terminated 2 different clients because I, I, I either was not communicating effectively or these guys simply they just weren't paying attention to not only the employees struggling to do what they were doing, but these guys were technically, from an accounting perspective, these guys were technically bankrupt. They didn't want to hear it. They actually asked me to do something completely illegal, which helped my terminating them. But in the 5 weeks that I was with them, I kept telling them, "Guys, your employees are overworked because of this, this, and that." And by the way, for all of my clients, I write an executive summary on a weekly basis, documenting what I'm trying to tell them. Anyway, these guys were simply not listening to the fact that the employees were struggling to make it to work, no motivation. They're struggling to do their job because there was no light at the end of the tunnel. And yes, the owners had the ability to make some pivots to make the environment better, but they simply were not having it, whether it was ego or a different motivation on their part. And I feel bad that I left the employees in the lurch like that. But there's some people out there that you just can't help. And you wonder, gosh, how did these guys build this thing? They did. But when they started to struggle, they just were not listening. So, yeah, there's a lot of companies out there that they just won't listen, just won't listen. And for somebody like me and for everybody else that does this out there, you have to have enough in your moral compass to terminate your own clients. I've never looked back at terminating the 15 different clients that I've terminated over 25 years. You just don't look back.
Yeah, your book asks, why don't leaders care about human psychology? And You even say most would say they do because of this blind spot, but they just focus on results instead. What do you think the brutal truth about why that's a cop out? Is it not being self-aware? Is it ego? And then why does it get to the point to where they ignore the human side and then it just sabotages everything?
That's a good question. And I would say it's twofold. Number one, it's self awareness. So I do actually have 2 books out there. I wrote a book 25 years ago, very simple. How do you run a small business, right? And one of the things that I wrote about was that entrepreneurs, in some cases, almost stumble into the businesses that they create. I've worked for so many entrepreneurs that this really was a hobby and it turned into a giant multi-million dollar company. I mean, look at Michael Dell. So there is that entrepreneur out there who can't see beyond his own entrepreneurism, right? We're all entrepreneurs in spirit, right? Energetic, adventurous. We want that thing that everybody wants, the American dream, right? So when it mushrooms, I'm working with a client right now in Dallas. These guys mushroomed over the last 3 years. They are still entrepreneurs. They're focused on their employees. But my point there is they just grew. They just started this thing and it, boom, there they are. So a lot of times these entrepreneurs grow so fast that they don't have time to pay attention to the employee, the human part of the employee. And then secondly, these entrepreneurs grow so fast and they're so successful and then they're not. Difficult times come around. And so the entrepreneur is not paying attention to the employee on the psychological side, maybe not even on the human side, because the entrepreneur is now has a line of credit that they got to pay on, now has taxes that they got to pay on, tariffs, right? Their supply chain is disrupted. Their main supplier is out of business. A myriad of things, unfortunately, block the ability for that leader, that entrepreneur, to focus on anything else, right? It's very easy to hire a marketing person to increase your sales. It's very easy to hire a guy who knows how to operate a CNC machine, but it's very difficult when you're not seeing it. It's very difficult to hire someone to help you fix the human part because it's in your blind spot. So those 2 things are very common that I've seen that some entrepreneurs, they just can't see the human side, the psychology side of employees. They just figure, hey, everyone's going to come to work tomorrow because they need this job. That's not really how things go.
Yeah,
So yeah,
interesting because you were talking about, the welders and what you did with that organization. So many leaders treat people like badge numbers. Like you just said, it's here's a CNC machine. This is what you trained at the trade school for. Here's the machine. I bought the machine. I'm giving you a paycheck. Now just stand here and work and don't cause any problems. It's how can a leader, like you said, they're growing so fast. So maybe there's these leaders and they're growing fast and there's just not enough time of the day. And it's all that, you're stressed out, all those things. How can they do a pattern interrupt from their work? Is it as simple as like taking a break and just start walking around and having a conversation? What's the best way to kind of reignite that inspiration?
well, if you're talking about if I'm involved versus if I weren't involved, if I'm not involved, if somebody is not in that person's ear, they're never going to see it unless they have some type of an epiphany on a personal level. I've heard of those stories. I've never actually seen it. Usually, when I'm involved, I'll tell the entrepreneur, I'll tell the leader, because again, when I nowadays, after 25 years, I can walk into an organization and immediately command respect. Most of my clients, they get it. They're calling Luarca because he's this, that, and the other stuff. I'm going to listen to him. But in the very early part of my career, I didn't have that. So I had to prove myself. And I always thank this one consulting company that I will not name. When I started out, based out of Chicago, 2 weeks of training, I only took one thing away from that training and I still live by it today. You got to give the client their money's worth. You got to give the client their money's worth. So when I first started out, that was in my head. I'm going to give this client their money's worth. And I'm going to go talk to the employees so I can get some ideas of how to do this. As I presented it to the client's looking at me like, wow, this guy is the authority in it. And then this goes back to what I said earlier. I let the client know, hey, look, this wasn't me. This was Jim, right? This was Dave over there on that CNC machine. It takes someone outside of the organization. We always used to say, someone looking in. That's not a family member. That's not an employee. That's what the entrepreneur has in their head. I'm not going to listen to my wife or my brother. I might listen to my attorney, but I'm certainly not going to listen to Dave at the CNC machine. Let me see if I can get some outside opinion. So that outside opinion does have a voice, but if that voice is very similar to what the client's already told himself, then that's not going to work out. That's why when I meet with clients, I meet with their employees too. So they're listening to my voice and they're hearing, hey, wait a second, Dave had the same idea last week, and now Lewis is saying the same thing. This is probably where I need to go. Again, it's worked for me over the years, but there is that I don't really want to call it a wall, a hurdle. Let's call it a hurdle that those entrepreneurs that really want to do well, but are stuck and they just don't know who to listen to, who to turn to, right? I empathize and I sympathize with all those entrepreneurs out there who I don't get to talk to. That's why I like doing these podcasts. Recently, I have a new client. And by the way, all of these small businesses are facing the very same things. They believe that they're the only one. Oh my gosh, I don't have money for payroll next week. You and 300 million other small businesses, right? Oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm going to do with payroll taxes. Oh my gosh, where's my next sale coming? All the small businesses, medium-sized businesses are facing the same thing. They just don't know it. When they get an empathetic voice like mine and I let them know, hey, look, I've seen this 100 times, that lowers that hurdle for them, and they start to open up, and things start changing. But it's very rare. Unfortunately, it's rare for some of these entrepreneurs to get the right advice, right? I got a CPA, but he's going to tell you accounting stuff. Yeah, I got an attorney. He's going to tell you legal stuff, right? I need to go find somebody that's going to help me communicate with my organization. And it's people like me, but we are dodo birds. It's very rare to find somebody like me. So, that's not a sales pitch, by the way. That's just the fact, right? A lot of these entrepreneurs are truly facing very similar issues. They just don't know.
Yeah, it's a symptom. Those are all symptoms like that you were talking about. And I think the reason why is, and you teach this, that empathy and self-awareness, they're non-negotiables for leaders.
Mhm.
Why do leaders see them as like soft skills? Or they even say, well, I'm not going to worry about that. That's a waste of time.
Well, there's two reasons for that. Number one, you'll get that response from a very successful entrepreneur. I've seen a lot of these entrepreneurs, they grow like weeds. And that, especially to males, because most small businesses are owned by men, that feeds the male ego, right? So there's no way in the world that you're going to tell them that you should talk to Lewis. He's not going to do it. The second reason is, it may sound familiar, but if that entrepreneur is surrounded by sycophants, right, then yeah, that entrepreneur will never hear what you're saying. Most small business is led by family, husband and wife, two brothers and sisters, father, 2 or 3 sons, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, dad's right. He's always going to be right. My brother's right. He's the leader of the organization. My spouse is the leader. So yeah, they're right. It's hard to get an entrepreneur to think about, I really should be listening to my employees. I really should be listening to that guy who's operating my $500,000 laser machine. Because if it goes down, we're out of business. So I probably should be listening to that. Right. So unfortunately, there are entrepreneurs out there who just have this mental block. And that's why a couple of years ago, I made the pivot to really push the psychology behind employees. I mean, at the end of the day, we're humans. And when you understand baser human behavior, right, you just get more performance out of that employee, which, by the way, it's not coerced. It's not influenced by anything. It's just letting the employee be a human, and you get this organic performance out of it. It's fascinating to see it. It just really is fascinating to see it.
Yeah, it is. Whenever you think of the word empathy, because a lot of entrepreneurs will say, I have empathy. I make sure that I get them lunches occasionally. I make sure, that they're paid well. They have benefits, health benefits. Why do we get that word wrong? Empathy.
I don't know. I think people get that word wrong because it's very close to sympathy, right? And they're totally different words. Empathy has to do with, I've been where you are, so I can talk to you. I have rarely seen where an entrepreneur knows exactly what that employee is going through under these conditions, right? Matter of fact, I've seen it the opposite. Not to give a lot of information away, but a couple of years ago, I worked for a company in the United States. The two brothers had literally purchased the company from dad. These two boys grew up in the business, and they were telling me the stories when they were in junior high and high school. They had to go to the shop and help dad and mom, by the way. Anyway, in their 40, 45, 50 years old, they bought the company from dad, and they ran that thing into the ground within 9 months. Terminated 172 employees, literally overnight, because one of them made a decision that the other one didn't like, and the rest is history. But my point there is, when I met them, oh yeah, I love our employees. 72, I know every one of their names. I know their kids' name. You don't lie to a psychologist, okay? I've seen that where people do get that word confused. I'm empathetic because I grew up in the shop. Doesn't mean anything, right? I've seen more entrepreneurs not be empathetic because again, the entrepreneur becomes an entrepreneur because they've started something that they know of, something they've seen, or something they like. But the environment that they create is very different from the environment they knew. Things might be different. Health insurance is a little bit more expensive. Depending on the state that you're in, the employee has to pay more to exist in that state. Are your wages commensurate, et cetera, et cetera? The fallacy to be empathetic, the fallacy is most leaders will just, yeah, I'll give you a raise. You want a new title? I'll give you a title. I mean, that's the way to create a disgruntled employee, is to throw money at it. Very similar to Michael Scott, you want all of your employees to be gruntled, right? Fastest way to making a disgruntled employee is to just continue to throw money at him, because that employee obviously is not happy. If you keep throwing $1, $2 raise every 3-4 months, that employee will continue to be unhappy. And all they're going to do is go out into the marketplace and test. Now they make $54 an hour, but the market will only bear $30 an hour. So now they got to come back and work for you and really not like it, right? Because they're used to what you created. It's Pavlovian, right? You've created, whenever they bark, you give them $1 or $2 raise. And you can't afford that anymore. So now you've got a very seriously disgruntled employee. Michael Scott would not approve of.
Do you think that, like with empathy, because I was talking to a leader here recently. It was so interesting. And he said, the machines are great. The computers are great. Everything's great. If it wasn't for the people, this business would be amazing, but I mean, when you think about that, and then I asked him, I was like, well, why do you feel that way? He goes, people cost so much. He goes, I just look at people and I see dollar signs. So like he had this, and when I was talking to a couple of his employees, they were more like, it was kind of passive aggressive, guilt feeling. So he's kind of like, you're not doing enough constantly, So he had kind of like, I don't want to talk to the employees. I don't want to handle the employees because I have this antagonistic feeling inside. Have you seen that in your 30 plus years?
Yeah. And that's why I said originally, humans are the users of the organizations. It goes back to my story. Most leadership they don't know what their company does, much less understand the stress that employees are under. That's why they cost so much. That's why I've seen a few entrepreneurs who discount the existence of their employees, but yet they drive a Lamborghini. They live in the best zip code of Orange County, California. I've had entrepreneurs discount the Hispanic workforce that have made their family for generations millions and millions of dollars. But, I have to be sympathetic in that the idea is that the entrepreneur doesn't understand what that employee is doing, much less what their contribution to the business is, right? Again, going back to what I say, humans are the users of the organization. Most often when I've met an entrepreneur who just is not having it with his employees, it's because he doesn't know what he's got. And when I say that, I don't mean in the employee, I mean in what they do. I'm constantly being asked by entrepreneurs, why does my employee not do this when I need him to do that? Because you're disconnected. I shouldn't say this, but I love telling this story. Starbucks is why I got a PhD. I decided after listening to Howard Schultz 30 years ago on CNBC talking about going into Starbucks is an amazing coffee experience. Well, to this day, whenever I go into a Starbucks, I don't know why I'm in there. And I travel a lot. So I've been into a lot of Starbucks. Something's going on in that culture. There's an obvious disconnect 30 years ago. between Howard Schultz and the line level worker, even to today. I didn't have enough coffee at home today, so I had to stop off at a Starbucks. And I could not believe what I would, and I go into Starbucks probably 3 times a week, and I just don't know why I do it. Probably because I don't know. Anyway, I felt and I feel every time I go into Starbucks like I don't belong there. I'm bothering them.
Yeah. There's even a new CEO from Chipotle, and it's still it's too transactional, I think.
Yeah, and that's it. Even this morning, I was looking at the way they were treating me. By the way, there's an average of 9 employees behind the counter at any Starbucks. All 9 of them, even though 9 of them did not interact with me, all 9 of them, it felt like they were so unhappy and miserable. And at first I was thinking, years ago, I thought, well, these are millennials. Has nothing to do with it. It's culture. It's culture, right? So
Yeah.
when you think about those entrepreneurs who they're disconnected. Howard Schultz was, obviously today, still is disconnected from the line level work. That entrepreneur who dismisses or discounts what their employees are saying or doing, they're disconnected. Even though these entrepreneurs are in the same building, they're in the same office space, right? They're just disconnected, and there is a way to reconnect them.
Yeah, and it's simple. I mean, just making eye contact. You're just focused on the cup. Every time I go in there, I watch them, and they're focused on the cup, which they're having to work really hard and fast. But it's like that's the wrong focus. But if you're ROI focused, that's what you're going to get. And I know you've done this a ton in manufacturing, and this is what I want to get with. This will be perfect with the question because I've got 2 more questions because we're coming up on the hour. But if a leader's stuck with the "we've always done it this way," and that would be what like Howard Schultz would be like, I'm stuck with "we've always done it this way" culture. How do you break that cycle? How do you unlock it? And I want to give an example, and I know you've seen this. I had a leader that I talked to a while back, and I went and visited him where he, in his work, and he was an accountant like you were. He was an accountant, and so the back office had like 15, 20 people that were just sitting around doing nothing because that's what he was comfortable with. I mean, he had like 4 people this is a small business. He had like 4 people, just to handle payroll, and then he had multiple accounts receivable, multiple accounts payable. And it was so interesting. And then I walked out and it was an actual shop like you did. I walked out in the shop and people were confused and dying and overworked. He didn't understand that process. So when you walk into an organization, that "we've always done it this way" culture, these blind spots, how do you break that cycle? That's got to be really hard. I know you have to come in as an outsider to do that, but what are some of the steps to break the cycle?
Data. It's the only solution. Data, data, data.
Yeah, you talk about that on your website, data. Yeah.
It's data. Humans, we don't like advice. We don't even like our own advice. You look at yourself in the mirror, whatever you say to yourself, okay, I'm 50-50 on that. Humans, we respond to data. And let me just, as an aside, in defense of all the entrepreneurs, some of those who are blind to the employees, they're stressed out. They're stressed out by 3 things. Payroll, number 1. Number 2, payroll. Number 3, sales. So when that entrepreneur, that leader who's got a blind spot for the guys out in the shop, is because he's thinking they don't know my stress. They don't know that I may not make payroll, right? Which a significant percentage of the small business in the United States struggles with that question every Thursday, because that's when you want that money in the bank, right? So I've been successful showing these leaders to change. Now I use the word pivot, right? That's a more politically correct term. I show them the data, why you should stop doing this the way you always do it. And how do I show them the data? Could be something as simple as a math equation. There's a cost in there that's not being accounted for, or there's a cost, we call it in accounting, we call it a finger error. There's a finger error in there that shouldn't even be in there. That's why your costs are ballooned. There's a time error. You're assuming that this is taking you 30 hours to produce when in fact, you do a time study, it's 19 hours. So I'm changing their way of thinking based on data, and that alone helps them lower that barrier that they have with their employees, right? In some of the companies that I've increased lead time, it's because we did something different and we alpha tested it. We alpha tested it by doing it the way you always do it. But let's try this other way and test that. Test it based on time, test it based on cost, and here's your data. And then the entrepreneur, oh, wow, I didn't know that. That's good because you know who came up with this? Jim, right? Remember Jim from the beginning? The guy with all the ideas that you never want to talk to, put some things in the suggestion box, but you weren't listening to, right? So that's 9 times out of 10. That's how I change an entrepreneur leadership mindset. Because again, in all defense of these leaders, it is stressful to own a business. I've owned a few businesses in my lifetime. And I'll tell you what, there's 3 things on my mind: payroll, sales. That's all. That's all every leader, even Michael Dell. What's he worth? Like $56 billion. I'm pretty sure he's not worried about that now. But in the very beginning of Dell Computers, that's probably what he was worrying about. Supply chain, payroll, marketing, payroll, inventory, payroll, right? I think every entrepreneur's middle name should be whatever, payroll, last name. It's all the entrepreneur is thinking about. So, and again, that entrepreneur, educated or not, I've worked with brilliant non-degree entrepreneurs. And then I've worked with amazing entrepreneurs who are very well educated, but they all have that same thread. What do I do about payroll?
Mm.
And when you get behind the 8 ball, when you get behind the payroll 8 ball, and then the payroll tax 8 ball, you can't see anything else.
No, yeah,
You
you're
can't
blind.
see that Jim has a great idea. You can't see that Dave is a great CNC operator. You can't see that there's 15 people in your accounting department and only 1 in your shipping department, right? So that's where the empathy comes in, right? I've seen all that. I've been all that, believe it or not. In the one company I owned it for a year and a half because I couldn't take the stress. I just couldn't take the stress. Because guess what my number one fear was? Payroll. Guess what my second fear was? Payroll. So my empathy with entrepreneurs is much deeper than this thing that I've become, this advisor
Mm.
that I've become. It's because I've been there. I know what it's like.
And it's so funny. This will be my last question, Dr. Luarca. But it's so funny on our side, the tech side. It's kind of the same thing in the sense of it's like funding, sales, funding, sales. So you'll get funding. Maybe you get a couple $1 million here. Maybe 5, 10 million. So you go through that, and then you hire more developers. And it's the same process over again. But the hardest thing, I think, for SaaS companies, and people in the comments can correct me on this, but what I've seen is the sales side, especially when it comes to software or, how do you, when you go into an organization, you see a huge sales deficit, how do you fix that? It's almost impossible to find a good salesperson.
Well, it's the old sell me this pen, right? What do I need you for when it comes to fintech? I mean, how many fintech companies are out there right now?
As many as people.
Yeah. How many coins are out there right now? How many guys like Louis Luarca are out there who quit their full-time job and say, I want to become a consultant. We don't use that word anymore. But, when I started doing this 25 years ago, everybody I knew was like, are you nuts? No, this is my ikigai. But I think you differentiate yourself on the sales side by uh, delivering what you say you're going to deliver. So talk about a disconnect. There's always been a disconnect. When I got out of college, I went to go work for one of the largest food companies in the world. I'm not going to name their names, but I learned a lot about a lot of stuff there. One of the things I learned was marketing never really understood what sales goes
Mm-hmm.
to sell that thing that you guys just storyboarded over 15 months and now it's a reality. Now you want us to go sell it? How do you do that? You don't just walk out into the world and say, hey, I work for the largest food company in the world. Buy this stuff. Hang on a second. There's a lot of variables that come in.
Mm-hmm.
Pricing, of course, margin for the business, lead time. In the manufacturing world, the entrepreneur can sell anything. What he's not paying attention to is lead time. And that happens in any business, including tech.
Yes, it does.
So the
100%. Yep.
zeitgeist of the day is what in the world is Apple going to do with these Chinese tariffs? How do we get our iPhones now for $3,000, right? So what is Tim Cook saying nowadays about differentiating himself? How is he selling the iPhone? The notion of the iPhone under these circumstances, and I'm going to get it to you on time, right? So in answer to your question, how do you find the right salesperson? It's that salesperson, it's that organization that can deliver on everything else, but lead time has got to be the driver. I've helped so many organizations when I'm done with the operational side of it. Then I do move into the sales side. I have a dual MBA, and one of my MBAs is in marketing, right? So, and working for that food company, what an amazing experience on the marketing and sales side. But regardless of what the business is, what the person on the other end of that meeting wants to hear is, when do I get my stuff? I know your Apple, high quality product. Tim Cook's a great guy. When will I touch what I just bought? Right? If you tell me in a month, if you tell me tomorrow, yay. Right? So, how do you find that right guy? The guy that is in sync with the organization to match that lead time. Because I'll tell you, I've been in those meetings where I've had to make promises. Fortunately, I was a high ranking executive that I could say to the customer, I'll get that to you by Friday. And you know what? I drive to the office and hey, everybody, you better get this. That's unfair. The crux of that is if you can get that sales and marketing team in sync with operations, because that was the one thing I saw at the food company. The marketing team was amazing with some of the stuff they created. We couldn't ship it. I mean, look at Tesla right now. Tesla, it's not doing well, not for any reason other than it cannot deliver. It's not delivering on what people are prepaying for. It's $3,000 to prepay, but still, the consumer is thinking, "Hey, I gave you something. Give me something. You said 90 days, and now you're saying 6 months, right?" So it is that synchronization between sales and marketing and the organization itself. Lead time.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's so true. I appreciate. We're on the hour. I want to thank you, Dr. Luarca, and I encourage everybody to go in the show notes. Your website's down there, and also your book, and it's on Amazon, and everybody can purchase it. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you.
And thank you for your wisdom and decades and decades. I know you worked with over 80 organizations and putting the psychology in there and this process engineering. I want to thank you for giving us your wisdom today.
Well, thank you for having me. I hope this helps somebody. So thank you. Thank you very much.